Amina sat at the dinner table, her eyes glancing over the plate of food before her. The rich aroma of spices filled the room, but instead of feeling hungry, a knot twisted in her stomach. She had always enjoyed the meals her in-laws prepared, but for the past few months, something strange had been happening. Every time she ate their food, she felt sick. It started with small discomforts, like bloating and headaches, but lately it had gotten worse. After dinner, she felt weak, dizzy, and sometimes even nauseous. It didn't make sense. Why was this happening only after meals at her in-laws' house? She glanced up at her husband, Omar, who was happily eating his food. His family always served large meals, filled with rich dishes, and it seemed like everyone loved them. Amina forced a smile and picked up her fork, pushing a bite of the chicken into her mouth. She tried not to think about the unease creeping in, but it was becoming harder to ignore. Omar looked at her, his face warm with affection. "You're quiet tonight. Amina, is everything okay?" Amina nodded, but deep down, she wasn't sure. She had tried to ignore the growing concern, but every time she ate here, she felt more uncomfortable. "I'm fine," she said, giving a small smile. "Just a little tired." Omar didn't press further. He never noticed anything wrong. Every time they visited his family, he always looked forward to the big meals, the laughter, and the endless conversations. But Amina couldn't help but feel like something wasn't right. She had started to wonder if maybe it was just her body reacting to something in the food, maybe some ingredient she was allergic to. But then why did she never feel this way when they ate at other places? As the evening went on, Amina tried to push her worries aside, but the sickness kept creeping up on her, slowly. It wasn't just physical discomfort, it was like a growing sense of dread that followed her. She excused herself to the bathroom and stood there for a moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her skin was pale, and her eyes seemed more tired than usual. This wasn't just tiredness. She had felt this before, but only in the past few months, ever since she had started eating at her in-laws' house regularly. Was she imagining things, or was there something in the food? Amina shook her head and took a deep breath. Maybe it was just stress. She had been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately with everything going on. Her work, the house, her responsibilities. But deep inside, a voice told her it wasn't just that. It felt like more than stress. When Amina returned to the table, she didn't finish her meal. She just pushed the food around on her plate, pretending to be interested. Omar was so focused on his conversation with his father that he didn't notice, but Amina's mind was racing. After dinner, as they made their way back to the car, Amina's thoughts were swirling. She felt lightheaded, like her body wasn't quite her own. Omar reached out and put his arm around her shoulders, guiding her gently. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, his voice soft with concern. "I'm fine," she lied again, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But as they drove home, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the food. It was more than that. It was a creeping feeling of suspicion, something she couldn't ignore anymore. She wanted to believe it was all in her head, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't ignore the signs. That night, as Amina lay in bed, her mind wouldn't let her rest. She had never felt this way before, and it made her feel isolated, as if she were carrying a secret no one else understood. Could it really be the food that was making her sick, or was she just being paranoid? She thought about asking her mother-in-law about it, but how could she? It would be awkward, and Omar would probably just brush it off as another of her worries. Amina decided that something had to change. She couldn't keep going on like this, wondering if something in the food was making her ill. She needed to find out what was happening. Tomorrow, she would try to be more aware of what was happening when she ate. Maybe she could pinpoint what was making her feel this way. The next day, she made up her mind. She would take action. She couldn't just ignore this anymore. She knew she had to figure it out, even if it meant questioning everything she had always believed about her in-laws and the food they served. Something wasn't right, and she couldn't just let it go. The growing concern inside her heart had become too strong to dismiss. The following days were no better for Amina. Each time she visited her in-laws, the same thing happened. She would sit down to eat, feeling the warm, comforting smells of the food, but it didn't matter how good it tasted. Soon after eating, she would begin to feel the symptoms. At first, it was just a little nausea, but lately it had been worse. The dizziness, the fatigue, the bloating, it was all becoming unbearable. Each visit, she tried to ignore it, but it was harder and harder to push it down. Amina began to feel trapped in her own body. The sickness never seemed to happen when she ate elsewhere. Why was it only happening at her in-laws' house? Was it something in the food, or was it her mind playing tricks on her? Every meal felt like a gamble. Sometimes she would leave early, rushing home to lie down in the safety of her own bed, hoping the sickness would pass. Omar noticed the change. He noticed how she would sometimes seem distant, or how she would avoid eating too much when they were at his parents' house. He'd ask her what was wrong, but she would always brush it off, telling him she was fine. She didn't want to cause trouble. His family was important to him, and she didn't want to be seen as ungrateful or suspicious. But it was becoming too much to ignore. Amina decided to see a doctor. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when she felt so terrible after every meal. It had been weeks since the symptoms first started, and they were only getting worse. Maybe there was something wrong with her health. Maybe she had an allergy or some kind of condition that she hadn't noticed before. The doctor ran a series of tests, asking her questions about her diet, lifestyle, and symptoms. Amina explained everything. The constant sickness after eating at her in-laws' house, the dizziness, the stomach aches. The doctor seemed concerned but reassured her that the tests would provide some answers. Days passed, and Amina tried to go about her daily life, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She began to avoid eating at her in-laws' house as much as possible. She made excuses. "I'm on a diet," or "I ate earlier and I'm not hungry." But each time, Omar would insist, saying his parents were worried about her. It was starting to feel like a trap. Finally, the test results came back. The doctor told her there was nothing physically wrong. There were no allergies, no stomach issues, nothing that would explain why she was feeling so ill after meals. Amina was confused, but she tried to stay calm. She asked the doctor if stress could be causing her symptoms. The doctor nodded but didn't seem convinced. Stress can cause some of those symptoms, but it's not likely to make you feel this way after eating specific foods, the doctor explained. It's unusual, but I'd suggest keeping a food diary. See if there are any patterns or ingredients you might be reacting to. Amina agreed, feeling both relieved and frustrated. She knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. If it wasn't physical, then what was it? She had started to wonder if her mind was playing tricks on her. Maybe she was just stressed out from everything going on in her life. Over the next week, Amina kept track of every meal, every symptom. She noted everything down carefully, what she ate, how she felt afterward, even the time of day. But no matter how much she tried, there was no clear pattern. Sometimes she felt fine. Other times she was sick for hours. She started to feel more and more frustrated. She couldn't figure out what was going wrong. The turning point came one evening when Omar's parents invited them over for dinner again. Amina didn't want to go. She knew what would happen. She would eat, and she would feel sick afterward. But Omar was excited about the meal. He was so close to his family, and they were looking forward to spending time together. She didn't want to disappoint him, so she reluctantly agreed to go. The evening started like any other. His mother had made her famous chicken curry, and Amina couldn't help but admire the beautiful spread on the table. Her in-laws were kind, and they always treated her with love and respect. But lately, Amina felt a strange distance between them. She felt like she was the odd one out. As usual, Amina sat at the table and began to eat, trying to push aside the growing sense of unease. She looked at Omar, smiling as he talked with his father. She tried to enjoy the meal, but as soon as the first few bites hit her stomach, the familiar wave of nausea began to rise within her. She could feel it, an unsettling tightness in her chest, a dizziness creeping in. She couldn't explain it, but it was happening again. But this time, something was different. She felt more than just sick. She felt wrong, as though something was inside her, slowly creeping into her system. She looked at the food on her plate, a sudden suspicion bubbling up. It was the same as all the other meals, but why was it only here that this happened? She had eaten similar food elsewhere without any problems. Her heart raced. Could it really be the food? Or was she just imagining things? But she couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. This was happening every time she came here. She excused herself from the table, her face pale. Omar, distracted by the conversation with his parents, didn't notice. Amina went to the bathroom, breathing heavily. She splashed water on her face, trying to calm herself, but the fear started to seep in. What was going on? Why was this happening to her? That night, as Amina lay awake, she couldn't escape the feeling that there was something sinister happening. Could someone be doing this to her on purpose? The thought terrified her. But who could it be? Her mother-in-law was always kind and welcoming, but was there something she didn't know? Was it possible that someone had a hidden agenda? Amina felt like she was trapped in a puzzle that she couldn't solve, and the sickness inside her only grew stronger. She knew she had to get to the bottom of it. She couldn't keep living like this. Something wasn't right, and she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Amina couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been growing inside her for weeks. The mystery of why she was getting sick only at her in-laws' house gnawed at her every day. Despite her attempts to ignore it, the tension had reached a breaking point. She couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine, not when her body kept betraying her every time she stepped foot inside their house. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how strange it was. Why only their food? Why only when she ate with them? It didn't make sense. She had eaten similar meals at other places, even at her own parents' home, without feeling a thing. Yet every time she ate at her in-laws, she was hit with the same awful symptoms. After the last dinner with Omar's family, when she had excused herself and barely held herself together in the bathroom, Amina knew she had to take action. She couldn't let herself continue to feel sick and confused. If she didn't find answers soon, this mysterious illness might consume her entire life. She decided she would take a bold step. It was time to confront her mother-in-law. The thought made her stomach churn. She didn't want to cause any tension or drama within the family, but the fear of continuing to feel sick was more overwhelming than her hesitation. The next morning, after spending the entire night turning her thoughts over and over, Amina decided to make the call. She asked Omar if he could meet her at his parents' house for lunch. "I just want to talk to your mom," she said softly. "There's something I need to ask her." Omar, as always, seemed happy and oblivious to the storm that was brewing inside Amina's mind. He didn't question her, and soon they were on their way to his parents' home. The car ride felt longer than usual. Amina's heart raced as she wondered what she would say, how she would bring it up without sounding paranoid or accusing. When they arrived at Omar's family home, Amina noticed the usual warm welcome. His mother greeted them at the door with her usual big smile, and Amina forced a smile back, but her nerves were on edge. As they sat down at the dining table, Amina couldn't help but notice the spread of food before her, the same dishes that had made her so ill over and over again. She tried to push down her feelings, knowing this was the moment. This was the conversation she had been avoiding. "I'm glad you could come over," Omar's mom said, her voice light and full of cheer. "We made your favorite, chicken biryani, and your usual dessert." Amina nodded, trying to be polite, but the anxiety was consuming her. She could already feel her body reacting to the food just by looking at it. "Thank you, Auntie," Amina said softly, barely able to keep her voice steady. Omar seemed so happy, so at ease. It made Amina feel even more alone in her doubts. She forced herself to take a small bite, her eyes darting to the side as she chewed. Once they were all seated, enjoying the meal, Amina decided it was time. Her heart thudded in her chest as she cleared her throat. Auntie, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about," Amina began, her voice shaking slightly. Her mother-in-law looked up from her plate, smiling warmly. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" Amina hesitated, unsure how to phrase her question without sounding rude. She had to be careful. This was her family, after all, and Omar's mother was always so kind, but she had to know the truth. "Well," Amina started, "I've been feeling really sick after eating. After I eat here. I don't know what it is, but I was wondering if there's something in the food that might be affecting me. I've never felt this way at any other place, but here. I always feel terrible afterward." For a moment, the room went quiet. Omar's mother stopped eating and set down her fork. Her smile faded, and she looked at Amina with a strange expression, one that Amina couldn't quite read. "What do you mean, dear?" she asked, her voice a little softer than usual. "We've always made sure the food is prepared with love." Amina's heart skipped a beat. There was something in her mother-in-law's voice, something that felt off. Was it surprise? Was it guilt? Amina couldn't tell, but it felt like there was more to her words than she was letting on. "I don't know," Amina said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've tried to ignore it, but it's been happening for weeks. Every time I eat here, I feel sick. Headaches, stomach cramps, dizziness. It just seems so strange, and I thought maybe there's something I'm allergic to in the food, but I don't know what it could be." Omar, sitting beside her, looked over at Amina with concern. "What's going on, Amina? You've never mentioned this before." "I didn't want to worry you," she said quickly, trying to explain. "I'd just been feeling off, and I thought maybe it was me, but I don't think it's just me anymore." Amina's mother-in-law finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Well, you know I always try to cook what everyone likes. Maybe you're just sensitive to something. I'll try to make something else for you next time, Amina." Amina nodded, relieved that her mother-in-law seemed open to the idea. But there was still a feeling of unease in her chest. The way her mother-in-law had responded, it felt like something was being hidden, like she wasn't telling the full truth. After a few more moments of awkward silence, the conversation shifted. Omar and his mother began discussing something unrelated, and Amina felt her thoughts swirling once more. What had she just uncovered? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this than she was being told. Her suspicions were growing stronger. There was something in the food, something intentional. But what was it? And why? Amina's gut instinct told her to keep digging, to keep asking questions. But now that she had opened this door, she wasn't sure if she was ready to uncover what lay behind it. She finished the meal as quickly as she could, excusing herself to the bathroom before she felt the familiar wave of dizziness washing over her. Once inside, she looked at herself in the mirror, her mind racing. Was she imagining things, or was someone really trying to make her sick? The suspense built in her mind, as she knew deep down that she was on the brink of a dangerous truth. But would she be able to handle whatever she found? Amina couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach after the conversation with her mother-in-law. The words she had spoken seemed to echo in her mind, but nothing felt quite right. Why had her mother-in-law reacted so strangely? Why did her voice falter when she said she would try to cook something different next time? It didn't make sense. As she sat in the bathroom, looking at her pale reflection in the mirror, Amina's thoughts raced. There was something more happening here, something deeper. The feeling that she wasn't getting the full story gnawed at her, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Over the next few days, Amina couldn't stop thinking about the strange situation. She couldn't focus on work or anything else. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the food, those perfectly cooked dishes her mother-in-law made so lovingly. And yet, Every time she ate them, she felt her body recoil. The nausea, the dizziness, the stomach cramps. It was always the same. It wasn't normal. She was sure of it now. Someone was doing something to her food. But who? And why? Amina's suspicions were growing by the day, and so was her frustration. Omar was clueless, as always, and whenever she tried to talk to him about it, he dismissed her concerns. "It's just the stress, Amina," he'd say. "You're overthinking it. You've been under a lot of pressure lately. Maybe it's just that." But Amina knew better. She had always trusted her instincts, and they were telling her something was horribly wrong. The next time she went to her in-laws' house, she told herself she would be more careful. She had to figure out the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or painful it might be. She needed to know if she was being poisoned, or if her mind was just playing tricks on her. As soon as she walked through the door, Amina could feel the familiar tension in the air. It was as if everything in the house was watching her, waiting for her to say something. But she stayed quiet, pretending everything was normal. She knew she couldn't raise any suspicions. Not yet. Dinner that evening was a simple meal, something light. A bowl of soup, some grilled chicken, and a salad. Amina knew that the food had been prepared with love, but it didn't stop the gnawing feeling in her gut. She sat at the table, pushing the food around on her plate, all the while watching her mother-in-law carefully. There was something odd about the way she was behaving. Her mother-in-law wasn't her usual self. She seemed overly cheerful, almost too cheerful. Amina watched as she placed the soup in front of her and smiled widely. "You'll love this, dear," she said in a sing-song voice. "I know you've been feeling off lately, so I made something simple and gentle on your stomach." Amina forced a smile. "Thank you," she said, but her voice lacked the warmth it usually carried. She didn't know if it was the food or the way her mother-in-law was acting, but something felt off. As she sat there, pretending to eat, Amina's mind raced. She needed to figure out what was going on, but she had to be careful. If her mother-in-law was involved in whatever was happening, she couldn't just confront her. That would only cause a bigger rift. No, Amina had to be smart about this. She took a deep breath and casually mentioned something she had been meaning to ask. "So, Mom, I was wondering, do you ever add anything unusual to the food? Like spices or herbs from somewhere special?" Her mother-in-law looked at her, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, nothing too strange," she said with a laugh. "Just a few secret family recipes that I like to keep to myself. But nothing harmful, I assure you. I only want what's best for you, Amina." Amina forced herself to nod, but inside, her suspicions grew stronger. There it was again, her mother-in-law's odd way of avoiding the question. A secret family recipe. What did that really mean? And why was she being so secretive about it? The dinner continued, but Amina's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't focus on the conversation. She couldn't even taste the food. All she could think about was the strange behavior of her mother-in-law. Something wasn't right, and Amina was determined to uncover it. Later that evening, after the meal had been cleared, Amina found herself alone with her mother-in-law in the kitchen. Omar had gone out to take care of something. Leaving the two of them in the quiet house, Amina seized the opportunity. "Mom," she said softly, her heart racing, "can I ask you something? I've been feeling really bad after eating here. You've always been so kind to me, and I know you make everything with love. But is there any chance? Maybe you're adding something I don't know about." Her mother-in-law froze for a split second, the smile vanishing from her face. Amina caught it, the fleeting change in her expression. It was like a mask slipping off, revealing something Amina hadn't seen before. "No," her mother-in-law replied quickly, too quickly. "No, of course not. It's all perfectly normal. There's nothing special in the food, Amina. I just want to make sure you're comfortable and well." But Amina wasn't convinced. The tone of her voice had changed. She had seen it in her eyes. There was something hidden, something she wasn't saying. "I'm just asking because I trust you," Amina said, her voice steady despite the nervousness creeping up her spine. "I want to understand what's happening." Her mother-in-law took a deep breath and then smiled tightly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything is fine, dear. Don't worry about it. You're just overthinking things. I'll make sure to cook something special for you next time." Amina nodded, but her mind was racing. She knew now that her mother-in-law was hiding something. There was no other explanation for the way she had reacted. The secret ingredient, the strange behavior, it all pointed to something Amina hadn't anticipated: her mother-in-law's involvement. The realization sent a chill down Amina's spine. What was the next step? How could she uncover the truth without risking everything? But Amina was determined now. She would not stop until she knew what was really going on. Whatever it took, she would uncover the secret her mother-in-law was hiding. And as the night wore on, the mystery deepened, leaving Amina with more questions than answers. The only thing she knew for certain was that she was on the brink of discovering something she never expected. The days following the tense dinner with her mother-in-law weighed heavily on Amina. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother-in-law's tight smile. The way her eyes had shifted when Amina had questioned her. The secret was clear now. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something Amina wasn't being told, and it was up to her to uncover it. That night, after the conversation with her mother-in-law, Amina couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, her thoughts racing. Why had her mother-in-law acted so strange? Was she really hiding something? Was she somehow responsible for the sickness that had plagued Amina every time she ate at her house? The next morning, Amina decided she needed to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't just sit around and wait for the truth to come to her. She had to be proactive, to find out what was going on. It was early, still dark outside, when Amina quietly got out of bed and tiptoed downstairs. She didn't want to wake Omar. She had decided she would confront him when the time was right. But not yet. She needed to gather all the evidence first. With a determined look on her face, Amina slipped into the kitchen. She stood there for a moment, staring at the empty counters, before she moved to the cabinet where her mother-in-law kept the spices. Amina had never paid much attention to what was in that cabinet before, but now it felt like the key to everything. Opening the cabinet, she scanned the rows of neatly organized jars and containers. She reached for a small glass jar filled with a strange, dark powder. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. She didn't recognize it, and there was no label. Amina's heart skipped a beat. She had to know what this was. Her instincts screamed at her that this was the key to everything. With trembling hands, Amina carefully opened the jar and sniffed the contents. There was a sharp, bitter smell, one that made her stomach turn. It was nothing like the spices her mother-in-law usually used. In fact, it was something that felt dangerous, something that shouldn't be in any kitchen. Amina quickly closed the jar and placed it back in the cabinet. Her mind was racing. Could this be the ingredient? Was this what had been making her sick all this time? She stood there, frozen, for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, she decided to do something she had never thought she would do. She was going to confront her mother-in-law again, this time, head-on. Later that afternoon, Amina went to her in-laws' house, trying to act as normal as possible. She greeted everyone with a smile, but inside, her heart was pounding. She knew she had to be careful. If she was wrong, if she accused her mother-in-law without the proper proof, it could destroy everything. But if she was right, if the jar contained something dangerous, Amina couldn't just ignore it. As dinner time approached, Amina sat quietly at the table, waiting. Her mind kept drifting back to the jar in the kitchen, the mysterious substance that was making her stomach churn just thinking about it. She couldn't let it go. She had to know what was going on. When her mother-in-law placed the food on the table, Amina noticed the same familiar smile on her face. "I made your favorite tonight, dear," her mother-in-law said, as if everything was normal. Amina smiled faintly, but her eyes were focused on the food. She didn't want to eat it. She didn't want to feel that familiar nausea again. But she had to stay strong. She had to find the truth. "Mom," Amina began, her voice steady but filled with tension. "I need to ask you something." Her mother-in-law looked at her curiously, raising an eyebrow. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Amina took a deep breath. "I found something in your kitchen. A jar. No label on it." "What is it?" Her mother-in-law froze. For a moment, there was complete silence in the room. Amina could see the tension building in her mother-in-law's face. Then, slowly, her smile returned, but it wasn't the warm, welcoming smile she was used to. It was tight, forced, and almost nervous. "Nothing to worry about, Amina," her mother-in-law said, trying to sound calm. "It's just an old family herb. I use it for special occasions. Nothing dangerous, I promise." But Amina wasn't convinced. She had seen the way her mother-in-law had reacted, the hesitation in her voice. There was something off about her explanation. "Why don't you want to tell me what it is?" Amina pressed, her heart racing. "I need to know. I've been feeling sick for months now. What is it in that jar?" Her mother-in-law stood up suddenly, her face flushing with anger. "I told you, it's nothing. You're imagining things," she snapped. "You need to stop making these ridiculous accusations." Amina felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the woman she had once trusted. The shift in her mother-in-law's demeanor was chilling, and Amina could feel the weight of the tension in the room. "I'm not imagining things," Amina said softly, her voice steady. "I've been sick every time I eat here. I need to know what's in that jar. If you're hiding something from me." Before she could finish, her mother-in-law turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Amina sitting there, shaken. The confrontation had done nothing to calm Amina's fears. In fact, it had only confirmed that something was very wrong. Her mother-in-law's reaction had been too defensive, too full of anger to be just a coincidence. Amina sat in silence for a long time, thinking. She had to do more. She couldn't just let this go. There was something in that jar, and it was time to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As the evening wore on, Amina knew one thing for sure. She had to dig deeper. This wasn't just about her health anymore. This was about uncovering a dark secret that her mother-in-law was hiding, and Amina was determined to find out what it was before it was too late. "You said." Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every day she grew more and more consumed by the mystery of the jar and the sudden changes in her mother-in-law. She had been patient, too patient, perhaps, but now her patience was running out. There was only one thing left to do: find out exactly what was in that jar. She couldn't just ask her husband, Omar, because he was too close to his mother. Any mention of his mom would likely send him into defensive mode, and Amina didn't want to put their marriage at risk. But she couldn't go on feeling sick every time she stepped into his mother's home. This wasn't just a passing illness. It was something more sinister. After another restless night of lying awake in bed, Amina made up her mind. She would return to her in-laws' house when everyone was busy, and she would search the kitchen more thoroughly. She had to be discreet. Her mother-in-law was always keeping her eyes on her. But this time, Amina would be smart. She knew exactly where to look. The next morning, while her mother-in-law was busy in the living room and her husband was at work, Amina slipped quietly into the kitchen. She knew that this time, she had to go beyond just the spice cabinet. There was more to uncover, and she had to dig deeper. Amina began by opening every cupboard and drawer in the kitchen, moving quickly and quietly. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she couldn't afford to stop now. After a few minutes of searching, she found it, a small hidden compartment at the back of the pantry. It wasn't very large, and Amina almost missed it, but when she pulled it open, she felt a rush of adrenaline. Inside, there were more jars. Some of them were familiar, but there were several others that Amina had never seen before. She grabbed one and examined it closely. This jar, unlike the others, had a label, though it was written in a foreign language Amina didn't recognize. She twisted the cap open and sniffed it. The scent was foul, almost metallic, and it made her stomach churn instantly. Amina's heart sank. This was the ingredient. She was sure of it now. But what exactly was it? Amina quickly closed the jar and tucked it into her bag. She couldn't risk staying much longer. She quietly closed the hidden compartment and made her way out of the kitchen. Her mind was racing as she left the house. She had to figure out what this substance was and why it was making her so sick. With a sense of urgency, Amina went straight to a nearby pharmacy. She needed help. She needed to know what she had found. After a few minutes of explaining her concerns to the pharmacist, Amina was handed a small vial with a suspicious look. The pharmacist told her it was a rare toxin, one that could cause sickness, fatigue, and nausea. Exactly what Amina had been feeling. This substance was illegal in many countries due to its dangerous side effects. Amina's hands shook as she held the vial. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Her mother-in-law had been secretly poisoning her. But why? What was the motive behind all this? Was her mother-in-law trying to get rid of her? Tears welled up in Amina's eyes as she tried to digest everything she had just learned. She had trusted her mother-in-law. She had believed that she was part of a loving family. But now, everything was a lie. Amina didn't know if she could confront her husband with this. What would he think? How would he react when he learned what his mother had done? Determined to get to the bottom of this, Amina knew she had to act fast. She couldn't just sit around and let this continue. She had to confront her mother-in-law again, but this time, she would be ready. She had the evidence. She had the proof. It was time to expose the truth. The next evening, Amina went to her in-law's house, her heart heavy with fear and anger. She had no idea how her mother-in-law would react, but she knew she couldn't keep quiet any longer. As soon as Amina walked into the house, she knew something was different. Her mother-in-law was nowhere to be seen, and Omar was sitting at the kitchen table, looking concerned. "Where's Mom?" Amina asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's upstairs," Omar replied, looking confused. "Why do you ask?" Amina sat down at the table, feeling the weight of the moment. She knew she couldn't put this off any longer. "Omar," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I need to talk to you. There's something important I need to show you." Omar frowned but nodded. "What's going on, Amina?" Amina took a deep breath and pulled the vial from her bag. She placed it on the table in front of him. His eyes widened as he stared at the small bottle. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. "I found this at your mom's house," Amina said, her voice cracking. "It's a toxin, Omar. Your mom has been poisoning me with it. It's the reason I've been so sick every time I eat there." Omar's face turned pale as he processed her words. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. Amina looked him in the eyes. "It's the truth, Omar. I've been feeling sick for months. And when I confronted your mom, she didn't deny it. She tried to hide it from me, but I found the evidence. I can't take it anymore." Omar sat back in his chair, stunned into silence. His expression was unreadable, and Amina could feel the tension building in the room. "I don't know what to say, Amina," he finally said, his voice shaky. This is unbelievable. I had no idea." Amina's heart ached as she looked at him. "I didn't want to believe it either. But it's real, Omar. And I need you to help me. We have to stop this." Omar stood up slowly, his mind racing. He didn't know what to think or feel, but one thing was clear. His mother's actions had shattered the trust he had with Amina. And now it was up to him to fix it before things got worse. "Let's confront her," Omar said, his voice steadying. "We'll do it together." Amina nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. It wasn't over yet, but she finally felt like she wasn't alone. And together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Amina's heart raced as she stood beside Omar, her hand trembling slightly in his. She had never felt so uncertain, so fearful of what might come next. The tension in the room was thick, as if the very air was holding its breath. She had never imagined she would be standing here, facing this moment, confronting her mother-in-law. The woman she had once trusted as a mother figure felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Omar took a deep breath. He had been trying to process everything his wife had told him, but part of him still didn't want to believe it. His mind kept racing back to all the times his mother had cooked for them, how she had always been so kind and welcoming. Could it really be true? Could his mother, who had been a second mother to him, really be capable of such treachery? But the evidence was undeniable, and Amina had shown him the vial, the jar, and the hidden compartment. There was no denying it any longer. "Are you ready for this?" Omar asked quietly, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Amina nodded, swallowing her fear. "I have to be. We have to put an end to this, for good." Together, they walked up the stairs, the house eerily quiet. Every step felt like it was leading them towards something inevitable, and Amina could feel her stomach tightening. She had prepared herself for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt the full weight of what was about to happen. What would her mother-in-law say? What would she do? They reached the top of the stairs, and as they approached the bedroom door, Amina's thoughts swirled. She couldn't let her emotions take over, but it was hard not to feel betrayed. She had trusted this woman, believed that her intentions were pure. But now, everything had changed. Omar knocked on the door, his voice slightly trembling as he called out, "Mom, we need to talk." There was a long pause before the door opened slowly. His mother stood there, her expression unreadable. She looked at them both, but there was something different in her eyes, something that made Amina's blood run cold. It was as if she already knew what was coming. "What's going on?" His mother's voice was calm, too calm. Amina could hear the edge in it, as if she was trying to keep control of the situation. But Amina knew better now. She wasn't in control anymore. Omar spoke first, his voice shaky but firm. "Mom, we know what you've been doing. We know about the poison." His mother's face remained impassive for a moment, and then a slow, calculating smile crept onto her lips. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice almost too sweet, but Amina could hear the hidden warning in her tone. "We found the jars," Amina said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "The toxin you've been using to make me sick. I don't know why you've been doing this, but I'm not going to stand by and let you hurt me anymore." At those words, her mother-in-law's smile faded. The woman's eyes flickered with something dark, something Amina hadn't seen before. For a moment, Amina almost thought she could see the real woman, the one who had been hiding behind the mask of kindness for all these years. "You don't understand," her mother-in-law said softly, her voice cold. "I did what I had to do. It was the only way to keep control. You were taking my son away from me. Amina, I had to make sure you stayed in line." Amina's mind reeled. "What are you talking about? Omar and I have always loved each other. We've never been trying to take anything from you. You're his mother, but that doesn't mean you have the right to control his life, or mine." The room was silent for a moment as Omar's mother took a step back, her face twisted with something Amina couldn't quite understand. Anger, resentment, or maybe even fear. It was hard to tell. "You don't know what it's like to lose control," she muttered, almost to herself. "I was trying to protect him, to keep him from leaving me completely. He's my son. I can't let go of him." Omar looked at his mother with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "You've lost me already," he said, his voice filled with a quiet rage. "You don't get to control my life. You never did, and I won't let you do this to my wife. Not anymore." His mother's eyes hardened, and for the first time, Amina saw the full weight of the woman's manipulation. It wasn't just about food or illness. It was about control, power, and fear. She had been using those jars to maintain her grip on him, to make sure Amina felt weak and dependent, so that she could stay in the family's life. But that wasn't love. It was a twisted form of control, and Amina wasn't going to let it destroy her. "I'm done," Omar said, his voice resolute. "You've crossed a line, Mom, and I won't let you hurt Amina anymore. We're leaving." His mother's face twisted with something close to panic. "You can't leave. You don't understand. I did it for you. I did it for us." But Omar stood tall, unyielding. "No, you did it for yourself. This ends now." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, Amina following close behind him. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. As they left the house and drove away, Amina couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and disbelief. She had known something wasn't right. But this was worse than she could have ever imagined. The woman who had been so kind, so welcoming, had been hiding a dark and dangerous secret all along. But as they drove further away, Amina realized something else too. They were free now. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the poison that had been slowly ruining her life. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. And that was enough to keep moving forward. As the car sped away from Omar's childhood home, Amina could feel a heavy weight slowly lifting from her chest. The air outside seemed fresher, as if the whole world had shifted. The streets looked brighter, and even the sky, which had been overcast earlier, seemed to have cleared just a little. Omar was silent beside her, his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. His jaw was clenched, his brow furrowed in thought, but there was a new strength in the way he held himself. Amina knew that this confrontation had shaken him too, but the difference was in how they both handled it. Amina felt as though she was slowly coming back to life, as though the fog that had clouded her mind for so long was finally lifting. She wasn't just the woman who had been poisoned and manipulated. She was someone strong enough to fight back, to stand up for herself and the man she loved. The car hummed softly along the road, the only sound filling the space between them. Amina wanted to speak, to say something, but she didn't know what words could capture the emotion swirling inside her. She had never felt so relieved and so exhausted at the same time. Everything had happened so fast. She had never imagined that her mother-in-law would be capable of such cruelty, but now that the truth was out, she couldn't unsee it. Yet, in a way, it was freeing. The lies, the sickness, the constant fear, it was all behind her now. They were leaving that chapter of their lives, and though it had been painful, Amina felt like she was stepping into something new. Omar finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry, Amina. I should have noticed something sooner. I should have been there for you." She reached over and placed a hand on his. "Omar, don't blame yourself. You didn't know. None of us knew." She squeezed his hand gently. "But now we do. And that's enough. We'll move forward from here." Omar looked at her, his eyes softening. "I don't know what I would have done without you. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening." Amina smiled faintly. "You don't need to apologize. We're in this together, and we'll make it through. One step at a time." The silence returned, but this time it was a comfortable one, filled with understanding and shared strength. As the miles passed, Amina's thoughts began to settle. She knew that there would be challenges ahead. There would be people who would question them, who would want to know why they had left. But Amina didn't care anymore. She didn't care about the opinions of others, not when it came to her own well-being and happiness. As they drove toward their new apartment, a place they had recently picked out together, Amina found herself imagining what their life could be like without the constant fear of manipulation and control. It wouldn't be easy, but at least it would be their life. They could start fresh, build their future on their own terms. When they finally arrived at the new apartment, the city lights stretched out before them, reflecting in the windows of their new home. Amina stepped out of the car first, taking in the cool night air. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled her lungs. She looked around, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions: hope, excitement, and relief. Omar joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "This is it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Amina turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears. Yes, this is it. For the first time in a long time, Amina felt truly at peace. There were no more lies, no more poison, no more secrets. What had seemed like an endless battle had finally come to an end, and she had come out stronger for it. They spent the next few hours settling in, organizing their things, and quietly talking about the future. Omar assured her that they would find a way to make everything right, that they would rebuild the trust that had been shaken. Amina believed him. They had been through too much together to let anything tear them apart now. As they sat together on their new couch, watching the city lights twinkle outside their window, Amina rested her head on Omar's shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. Everything she felt was already there and in the warmth of his embrace. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Amina knew that tomorrow was a new day, a new beginning. And no matter what challenges they faced, they would face them together. She wasn't alone anymore, and that thought filled her with more peace than she had ever imagined possible. Omar looked down at her, his smile gentle. "We've got this, Amina. We're going to be okay." Amina nodded, her heart full. She knew it was true. They had each other, and together, they could face anything. With that, the future felt bright, filled with endless possibilities. And so, they sat there, side by side, letting the night pass peacefully, knowing that no matter what the world threw their way, they would always have each other.